Goed, goeiedag ENGT421 studente. Dit is week 4. Ons doen die tweede deel van studie eenheid 1 hierdie week, waar ons spesifiek gaan kyk na, ek weet nooit wat die Afrikaanse woord vir speaking is nie, maar gesels, wat jy dit ook al wil noem, of praat. Kom ons gaan verder. Net weer die kontakbesonderhede. Dankie vir die van julle wat my wel gekontak het. Daar was 'n paar wat al vrae gevra het oor die semesteropdrag. Dit is typies die tipe vraag wat ek eerder sal kan antwoord as mevrou Bischoff. Nie noodwendig so dringend nie, maar onthou asseblief, die reël is, as iets dringend is, vra vir my, of die riglyn ten minste, dis nie 'n reël nie. As iets minder dringend is, en jy kan vir 48 uur wag, dan is mevrou Bischoff, die kanaal wat jy kan kontak. Goed, jou assesseringsrooster, jy het reeds E-klas toets 1 afgehandel. Die volgende ding op die skedule is, ek so kyk, is die eerste gedeelte van die semesteropdrag. 'n hele paar van julle het al navraag daaroor gedoen, wat ek dink 'n goeie ding is, want dit maak dit net 'n bietjie meer duidelik, en jy weet presies hoe om dit te doen, en kyk tog wel of jy dalk jou luister en praat vaardighede wat jy dalk mag leer, ook in jou semesteropdrag kan gebruik. Daar is die eerste gedeelte met inwees, die 20ste Augustus, jy verloor outomaties 25% indien dit nie dan ingedien word nie. Jy kan ook dan met jou tweede gedeelte aangaan daarna, of jy kan nou met jou tweede gedeelte aangaan as jy wil. Dit is maar bloot om julle net so ver te kry om die ding daaraan deur die semester te werk, in plaas van alles aan die einde te doen, en dat ek weer desperate e-posse kry oor studente wat nie gaan klaar kry nie. Okay, I've spoken about the semester assignment and the fact that you have to submit it, the first part in week 6. Julle sal sien ek het daar gesê 21 Augustus en op die assesseringsrooster staan 20 Augustus, dis maar bloot, ek dink die Saterdagse datum teenoor die Vrydagse datum, so wat ook al daar op E-klas gestel is, dit is so laat ek met inwees. Ek dink dit sal op 21 Augustus gestel word. Ek sal net weer gaan loer as ek daarvan onthou. Okay, we're going to focus on speaking today, and that's the second part of study unit 1. Last week we did listening. Of course, these two things are integral to each other, but it's also something that works hand in hand. But I think it's important that you realize that you understand these two separately. I also asked you to go and watch a video beforehand. There will also be a video afterwards. We're going to look at specifically how we should perceive speaking in our classroom, how we can help learners improve it. We're going to consider our own speaking as well. And then we're going to discuss activities and, of course, pronunciation. The important thing the next slide is going to make is that we live in a strange world where we try and teach somebody a new language by starting off with reading and writing. And actually it should be started off by listening and speaking. Especially people who are trying to acquire the second language just for conversational purposes. Of course, that's not necessarily in our classroom, but that's a good way to start, because then you have got a basic structure in your mind, and then when it comes to writing and reading, it becomes so much easier because you understand, you form that basic brain synapses regarding the structure of the language. The theoretical background is also important, especially for our case, but I seriously think in the first year there should be a much more higher concentration on listening and speaking as opposed to just reading and writing. Okay, the other thing we also need to keep in mind is the whole thing behind understanding a language and learning a language is not necessarily always that obvious to our first additional language learner, specifically in the South African sense, because we've got many different languages coming together, and we dare not ignore listening and speaking, as this is basically the map when it comes to the other skills. I've mentioned that it can differ quite extensively, and I'm also going to hammer on this quite significantly in the rest of this lesson, specifically because I think this should start with listening and speaking, and you should start your 2-week lesson cycle, as you're going to do in your semester assignment as well, by having a basic number of words per week. Words that you can use throughout the week, and words that can also be then used for a spelling test at the end of this the 2-week cycle. But words that need to be used extensively to improve our first additional language learners' vocabulary. Okay, but start by looking at yourself. Okay, ask yourself the following: are you able to follow when you speak? Remember, speaking from oneself is also actually a thinking process, because you are thinking in your brain and you are basically producing from what you are thinking into speaking. Are you able to follow yourself? Ask people that don't necessarily know you. Can you follow me? Do you understand what I'm saying? Am I using too complex words? Am I using too simple words? Do I sound authoritative, or do I sound over authoritative? Do I speak too loud or too soft? Has my voice, not everyone's voice can do that, the impact of creating a calming effect or a disruptive effect? That's very important. The other day I was looking for insurance, and my wife contacted a number of people, or a number of insurance agencies, and one of the insurance agencies that immediately put me off was someone who had a high-pitched voice, and she had certain nuances in the way she spoke. Now, that's not her fault, but as a potential customer, that's something that put me off, and I didn't go with that insurance. I didn't even bother to get a quotation from them, which is perhaps a bit petty. I can agree with that, but it does make an impact when you are in a teaching situation as well. Then lastly, and we'll discuss this extensively more to the end of the lesson, do I pronounce vowels and associated vowel sounds correctly, considering that learners will model their pronunciation on mine? That is very important. I can remember being at school with a non-English speaking person like myself, and this seems to be a societal thing from where this person came. They didn't pronounce December. They pronounce it as December, a Z-S, which is, of course, irrespective of which accent you have, is not correct. There's a lot of amongst a lot of the rural areas, in particular Limpopo, and I say Limpopo because I picked this up in the Limpopo parts of the Kruger Park. It's nothing against Limpopo. People speak of vehicles instead of vehicles. So then those are the nuances that you need to correct in your teaching of speaking, and which learners will then hopefully model on you as well. Okay, when I listen, and I'm bringing listening into this again because these two work in hand. When I listen to respond, do I listen with my full attention to what learners say to me? This is a mistake I still make as well. We are so busy and so intertwined in what we have to do that we don't listen to what people ask us to do. Go make the effort and see if you are fully listening to what people are saying. We often even miss this when we are reading. We read so fast that we miss the gist of what people are asking us about. The next thing that you need to look at, appropriate level. I spoke about this a bit earlier. This may vary from class to class, from individual to individual. Often it is beneficial when we ourselves are first additional language speakers of English, soos wat ek ook maar is oorspronklik, alhoewel ek dit nou 'n bietjie verleer het. Ek klink meer asof ek eerste taalspreker is, maar in elk geval, it's beneficial if we are also first additional language speakers, but there are certain standards, of course, that we need to conform to as well, that we need to work towards, that our learners will model themselves on as well. And then finally, keeping in mind that communication is not just speaking, but there are also visual aspects. How do I present myself? My facial expressions, my gestures, my body language. People can often misunderstand this in terms of communication, not just language, not just speaking, of what I'm trying or how I'm trying to come across by using the incorrect body language. Okay, I want us now to look at how we help learners. Excuse me, I just need to take a sip of coffee. This is specifically concerned with, or more practically based, we're going to have a look at activities, but we're also going to look at things that we as teachers need to do before we even attempt to help learners to improve their speaking. Okay, you would have noticed in the videos, the first two videos, both of the videos say it's group work is very important. Okay, this means that you need to carefully get to know your class. You need to realize who is perhaps better at speaking English and who is not as good, and try and mix these two in groups so that you can learn from each other. But the important thing is the learners must always be actively involved. This has a lot to do with your own planning, a lot to do with the topics you choose, the type of activities. Go and look at that video at the end. I'll open it on eClass once we've done here, where the person gives 10 speaking activities in a first additional language English class. Save that link, go and look at it again. This is a very useful thing to do. I'll say this later, but I think we need to move away from thinking about listening and speaking just in the case of listening comprehensions. I think there's so much more to do in the way that we can assess so much easier on the children as well, but I'll say that a little bit later, specifically on listening comprehensions. Your language that you use, specifically in your lower grade 4 English first additional language classes, should be a little bit toned down. Not toned down in terms of sound, but in terms of the type of words that you use, synonyms and antonyms, topics that are chosen. But also use this as an opportunity to teach the children new words as well. This is the basis of them learning the new language, or the first additional language, English in this case, is the building out of vocabulary. Vocabulary. Okay. Jy kan hoor nou, ek is nie die enige eerste taalspreker. Okay. Then, and this again is part of planning, you have to have clear instructions. You have to go and physically orientate yourself as to how your lesson, your speaking and your listening lesson will pan out, the questions that need to be answered, the type of questions the children need to ask to ensure that there is fluent speaking activity. By fluent, I mean that there's no chance for the children to get bored, but they are actively speaking and actively learning as well. Then, I spoke about topics earlier. Do yourself a favor and find out what are popular topics amongst the learners. It's just a question of reducing a bit of the anxiety behind speaking. They are already familiar with the topic, so hopefully the speaking will go a little bit easier as well. Okay. The next point I'm saying with a pinch of salt, because I'm very pro the use of translanguaging as well, where your stepping stone is communication first, and learners can go back to their home language, and you try and use their home language to accommodate the learning of their first additional language, the English language. If you think, for example, of Cummins and his iceberg theory, very relevant in this case. So, instructions to the learners are to try and speak as much as the first additional language in the classroom. I'm not saying they shouldn't speak home language, because again, you're trying to take away the anxiety behind speaking and learning the first additional language by firstly ensuring communication takes place, effective communication, and then duplicating that onto the first additional language. It should be a learning opportunity straight through. The second bullet there speaks about using specific senses. Be sure that the learners know how to express themselves according to these senses. So perhaps at the start of the year, especially with the grade 4s, start off with a theme specifically concentrating on senses, orientate them around them, the vocabulary around senses, smelling, tasting, hearing, speaking, describing the different tastes, different sounds that they hear, different types of speaking. That is very important as well. And then take this forward within each follow-up lesson. Then vocabulary. I've been hammering on this continuously. If you, I don't want to say that your planning and your lesson is bound to fail, but I think you need to start your 2-week CAP cycle. And I say this both from experience and from theoretical background. Want ek het ook skool gegee, so ek het daar 'n bietjie agtergrond daarin ook. your vocabulary should be your foundation for any lesson. So at the start of a lesson, and luckily a lot of the textbooks are designed in that way. At the start of a cycle, of a 2-week cycle, start your first lesson as listening and speaking, introducing vocabulary, new words and their meaning, the use of them, the use in speaking, the use in writing, and continuously learn those new words. It could be about 20 words, makkelijk. Okay, julle hoef nie, want baie keer is die handboek bitter min woorde en hy gee sê maar 5. Maak het bietjie meer. Okay, let them actively use those 20 words, synonyms, antonyms behind it. Design your lessons behind it. And at the end of the 2-week lesson, you could go in further and say, okay, these 20 words are your spelling words every 2 weeks, that they thoroughly embed this new vocabulary. As I said there, the new terminology must not only be shown to the learners throughout the teaching process, you must actively use it. Okay, there's the practical activity that I've just spoken about. And then go and find out about difficult words in other subjects as well. Of course, still in the English language, jy kan nou nie Afrikaanse woord gaan gebruik nie. Although there might be South African English words that originally come from Afrikaans. There are many of them. Okay, I've divided these activities in levels from beginner to advanced. Pardon me. This is a very good idea to base your listening activities and speaking activities on this. The first thing I'd like to say before we start off, ek dink, uit my ervaring, veral as jy met terugvoer gee op 'n ouer aand, it is very important to keep a constant a monitoring situation behind every child in your class in terms of speaking. Want baie keer vir al die eerste nasionale taal ouers kom net uit en sê, het my kind se Engels verbeter. En die eenvoudige teenvraag daar is, waarvan praat jy? Praat jy van, kan hy beter Engels praat, kan hy beter Engels lees, kan hy beter Engels skryf? Okay. Of kan hy beter Engels luister ook for that matter? Principally, I think parents have speaking in mind when they ask for feedback on this. So hou 'n klein boekie, notaboekie by jou met 'n klein klaslysie vir ding. En soos wat kinders met jou praat in die taal, maak 'n klein prentjie 10. Jy kan jou eie shorthand daarvoor ontwikkel. Dit gaan nie daaroor dat dit formeel moet wees en op die rapport gaan verskyn. Dit gaan nie daaroor dat jy redelike akkurate terugvoer kan gee in terme van hoe die kind se spraakvaardigheid is of die spreekvaardigheid. En baie keer gaan daai spreekvaardigheid ook reflekteer in sy ander vaardighede. Sy skryf, sy lees. En dan weet jy ook nogal waarom op te konsentreer, wat kinders om te konsentreer in terme van die aktiwiteite wat jy vir hulle voorlê, om dan ook een of die ander kind sy vaardigheid te verbeter. Dit kan rarig, ek weet nie, jy kan 'n kruisie maak vir 10/10, weet, dink net dat jy net 'n algemene oorskou het, dat jy die kind kan plaas in terme van sy spraakvaardigheid, en jy kan dit maar vir die ander vaardighede ook doen. Dit is nie meer altyd maklik om by te hou nie, maar hou net so lysie by in jou daaglikse interaksie met die kinders. Okay, let's have a look at topics for beginners for speaking and related activities. All of us shop, although COVID has put a bit of a halt to this. So speak about shopping excursions, shopping lists, communication with family members, a grandpa, a father, a mother, a brother, a favorite auntie or uncle, dressing and dressing codes. Okay, build this out as part of a bigger theme. For example, dressing for the beach, dressing for a religious activity, health issues. Go and have a look at what's happening in life sciences. Try and use the terms or the parts of the body or whatever they do in life sciences, and try and bring that over in the home language if it's not, or the first additional language if it's not already done like that. Occupations. These children are at an age where people start asking them, but what do you want to become one day? And they still can only, they can answer this using basic vocabulary. Teach them that vocabulary, lawyers, doctors, teachers, engineers, and combine occupation-specific vocabulary to that to build this out gradually. That's as far as beginners. If we move to intermediate children in terms of speaking skills, life skills, being able to tie your shoelaces, conducting or demonstrating a recipe, driving in traffic, left, right, forward, backwards, stop, yield, that kind of stuff. Occupations again, books, there could be a book discussion. Remember just to keep the level appropriate. Music, the type of music they listen to. Go to the lyrics in the music. Discuss the lyrics. They might just realize that they don't really like the music based on the lyrics and perhaps more the tune. Voting. Voting is quite a relevant topic in South Africa. It's something that happens with provincial and national elections. How voting works. What are the keywords? What vocabulary is associated with that? Just so that you build out their vocabulary as well. Traveling, okay? But keep in mind that not all learners may have traveled. So it could be traveling towards a family member in the next town or in another province. It doesn't necessarily have to be to specific destinations, to the sea or to the game reserve or whatever. You could introduce that to them as well. You could potentially, depending on what the situation is, even turn that into a potential class trip. So do the effort of finding out what your class trips might be, your 8 suppies, and start incorporating vocabulary into the first additional language as well. Plans that they might have for the future. And then lastly, something simple as a morning and an evening activity, breakfast, dinner, who prepares it, where do you sit at the table, what is typically the food you get to eat, does mommy and daddy both cook in the house, things like that. A lot of these things, before we move to expert, are things that you'll start picking up within a specific class. Can I do one topic as opposed to another with this class? What can I not do? What is their level? These are all factors that play a role in teaching listening. Expert things, for example, selling of articles. There could be a nice little drama that they could perform, and they have to speak where they have to sell articles, where they have to give feedback on films or books or television programs. For the older children, bursary and job applications, interviews for jobs. The children seem to like performing interview scenarios as well in the celebrity guise. So let the one child perhaps be the interviewer and the other one the interviewee as a celebrity, for example. Expressing satisfaction with or dissatisfaction with rules. Start with your own school rules. Okay. Or there might be a certain problem in the school as well, where you have to that the children don't agree with, and how to express their satisfaction or dissatisfaction in an orderly manner, and by building out, as I said, the vocabulary, that word that I can't pronounce for some other reason now. Okay, problems in their lives. This might be more personal, but might be a more one-to-one thing that you might feel it'd be best to do that in a group situation where friends go together, where there's a real problem in their lives, which might, and this is a big might, this shouldn't be the main purpose behind it, might also bring out potential pastoral problems that can be addressed. Then lastly, attributes of special people. Going back to the celebrities, but also considering special people in their lives, their grandparents, their mother or father, a special uncle or auntie. The possibilities are vast, but it all is determined by who's sitting in front of you and what you are able to do, how you plan behind this, how you regulate this. Remember, good speaking is controlled speaking. In this case, it could be free speaking as well, but you as a teacher, tend to lose direction, and the children move in all directions except the one that you want to go. So control this as good as possible. Go and actively think about the lesson that you want to prepare, how you want it to work, what are the rules you need to set down. Okay, I'd like us now to also consider other activities. I'm going to speak briefly about this. Pictures, of course, is a very good starting point because we live in a very visual world. There are some examples there where learners can choose pictures that they need to speak about, pictures where they have to show out minor differences between two pictures, for example. A dialogue is another example. Personally, I think it's time that we incorporate listening and speaking much better together. Not just have your a speaking activity and a listening activity. Have a listening and speaking activity, and make things more alive. Not just have a listening comprehension, for example. En ek gaan nou sê hoekom ek so dink ook. There is also then the dialogue. Okay. Taking it back to group activity, pair the stronger and the weaker learners together for a dialogue. Let them actively plan and practice and help with pronunciation. Discussion. This could be a discussion on the weekend's events. For example, the Olympics at this part, this stage of the year. Who won what did they watch? What stood out to them? Let them work in pairs. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to actively discuss this in the class with each other, but you could make this into activity where they then swap partners, where each partner needs to tell the other partner what they discussed in the original pairs, for example, and they need to tick certain things. So then you practice both the listening and the speaking. Finding partners. Okay. Typically, I don't know, ek weet nie hoeveel van julle kan onthou, was speletjie wat ons kinders gespeel het, wat jy die kaartjies onderspoor uitpak en dan sal prentjie op een en dan sal het soortgelyke prentjie op 'n ander kaartjie en dan moet jy onthou waar die kaartjie is. Daai tipe aktiwiteit maar net in 'n praat manier wat hulle kan onthou. So met ander woorde, jy gee vir elkeen 'n woord en dan sekere of elke woord word 2 keer herhaal in die klas, maar dan sê die een die woord en dan sekere nee, dan gaan ons aan en dan moet die ander een opsteek en sê ek het ook daai woord of dis wat daai woord is en daai tipe van goed. Okay. Pronunciation. Pronunciation can be a bit of a contentious point. I think living in South Africa but being exposed to other English speakers around the world as well, we've come to the conclusion that there isn't necessarily one standard pronunciation. We all try and work towards one pronunciation. Especially, I was listening to creoles of English, pidgin and creoles of English being spoken in, for example, West Africa. It's something entirely different almost. Do yourself a favor and Google BBC News Creole, and they give you versions of the same stories in the Creole language and see how much it differs, how people have adapted simply to be able to communicate with each other. And keep that in mind as well in terms of pronunciation. I think the important thing behind pronunciation is people should still be able to understand you and that meaning does not get lost, especially within the South African context. I spoke about specific words that are often culturally mispronounced and try and adapt that as well. You can see there by the second bullet I said accent is acceptable. But pronunciation, spelling and grammar is something that every speaker of English must be able to do correctly. Dit gaan 'n rukkie vir jou vat om jou Afrikaanse aksent te verloor. Met Engels, dit is geval van blootstelling. As jy genoeg blootstelling gaan kry, as jy genoeg blootstelling gaan aan woorde gaan sê en hoe hulle uit te spreek en sulke goeders, dan behoort jy eventueel 'n baie meer neutrale aksent te hê en uitspraak as wat jy gehad het om mee te begin. This counts for every single non-English speaker that's trying to learn English as well. That's why you get the Russian accent as well. I don't know what other accents you have. Interestingly enough, in terms of speaking, just a general knowledge question, how did the American accent develop? Okay, now the answer in this lies to the immigrants to America, and one of the main nationalities to immigrate to America because of the potato famine was the Irish. Now, if you listen carefully to Irish accents when they speak English and you listen to American accents, you'll start to realize there are a lot of similarities, and this became the dominant accent. there wasn't necessarily so many Irishmen that immigrated, or there was a lot because potato, that was their staple food, was they couldn't grow potato crops, and it was basically a question of immigrate or die from hunger. So there's a lot of Irish influence as well in America, but this became the dominant accent, although the American accent has evolved into something its own. So there's also always some cultural aspect to language as well. But okay, I'm drifting off the topic. There are a couple of features that I'd like to lift out now, technical features specifically. We're going to start with consonants. En I think it's important, dis kom ek ook vir julle sê, begin jou 2 weke siklus met woorde wat geleer word, dat hulle uitgespreek word, dat hulle geskryf word, dat hulle gebruik word, en dat hulle 'n verbintenis het aan die tema. Move back to your thrash charts. Okay. Make the children aware of the specific consonant sounds associated with these words and these letters. There's the example there of the ch sound, which in the word church and architecture is pronounced entirely differently. Church, where you can hear it, and architecture, where you can't hear it. Make the children aware of this. There's another example in the PH consonant. When in English it's pronounced as F, but not necessarily as a P sound as in many of the other languages. I can remember a specific example where there's a gate to the Kruger Park called Phabeni, spelled Phadeni, and you don't say it as F, but a lot of the English-speaking children that I had, home language speakers that I had in the class, spoke of Phabeni instead of Phabeni. But the fact of the matter is the language from which it originates is not English, so the sound won't be the same, even though the consonant sound is the same. Okay, the same applies to vowels. Go back to your thrash charts for vowels specifically. Make the children aware. When you teach, for example, articles, the and an, when you use and when you use an. If you think back to in ENGT421, when we said an is used for when the word has a vowel, starts with a vowel or has a vowel sound. The exceptions, of course, being our, because it's pronounced as a vowel sound, even though it starts with a consonant. You need to highlight the fact that vowel lengths can vary in English, which many English speakers struggle with. If you look, for example, there, there are the examples at the bottom. The word chip as opposed to the word cheap. And often people pronounce it as cheap, and then they actually mean chip. It and eat, you often find as well, with second language speakers pronouncing it as this. So it's these small things that you need to concentrate on as well. An additional aspect is the rhotic R, or the R that is not pronounced. Now, as jy my naam in Engels reg uitspreek, is my naam Arthur. Kan julle hoor, daar is nie rarig die uitspraak van die 2 R nie. Maar in die Afrikaanse gemeenskap staan ek al onbekend as Arthur. En ek het so groot geword, so dit pla my nie rarig nie. Maar streng gesproke is dit still R of silent R's, rhotic R's in my name. That's just one example. The other examples there are, for example, the word hard and hour. No pronunciation of the rhotic R in the second instance. Teach the children that we pronounce the R at the end of the word when it's followed by another vowel or by a vowel, and not when there is no vowel. So, jy gaan jou basiese vokaal en konsonante baie sterk moet vaslê, jy gaan jou woorde moet begin gebruik en voorbeelde deur jou thrash charts, en so gaan die praatry ook verbeter. Okay. Just another sip of coffee, we're nearly done. The G sound is another example that you find in English. If you look, for example, at the word sign, where you don't pronounce the G, as opposed to signature, where you do pronounce the G. In baie van die tale, Afrikaans byvoorbeeld is 'n voorbeeld, maar ook Zulu, is hierdie klanke redelik vas. Daar's nie variasies in die klanke nie. Onthou, Engels het 44 foneme. En ek dink Afrikaans en Zulu het iets soos 20. So dis aansienlik minder klanke wat die kinders hoef te ken uit hulle huistaal uit. En wat dit nogal moeilik maak. Of course, the reason behind this is because English was influenced by so many different languages. Because the British Empire made up 3/4 of the world, a lot of local words and vocabulary got taken in. The French influenced the English very much. As jy ooit 'n Engelsman hoor 'n grappie maak oor 'n Franse ding, vat dit maar met 'n knippie sout, want tradisioneel hou hulle niks vir mekaar nie. Okay, so this is why there are so many phonemes in the English language. Dit is iets wat mens baie op moet konsentreer reg aan die begin met die kinders. Terwyl jy hulle praatvaardighede bevorder, wys dit vir hulle uit. Koppel spesifieke klanke aan spesifieke woorde volgens spesifieke temas en laat hulle dit vir 2 weke oefen en gebruik in sulke goeders en jy behoort baie goed die ander kant uit te kom met hulle in terme van praat. Then word stress, we spoke about this earlier in the last lesson where the meaning of a sentence could be established specifically through word stress. It could be changed as well. I'll give you the example here. In tonic words, if you look at the example there, very sick, not very sick. In terms of an adverb that's an adjective of degree, it gives us an idea, not that there's something like an adjective of degree, it gives us an idea of how sick someone is, not the fact that they're sick. So kyk daarna ook. Dit gaan natuurlik verbeter deur meer blootstelling aan leestekste waar daar spesifiek moet gekonsentreer word op waar die stress op die in die sin is. So the basis of a lot of these things before I get to contracted forms is exposure as well. Give the children exposure to speak. Give the children exposure to listen constantly, to read constantly. The more exposure to English text there are, the better the English text or the English speaking will be as well. Dus dit geldt maar vir enige taal. As jy nie gaan blootstelling gee nie, dan gaan jy dit nie bemeester nie. Ek wil partykeer 'n koroner skiet as die na my toe kom en sê ek praat boere Engels. Dit gaan nie daaroor dat jy 'n boer is of dat jy nie kan Engels praat. Dit gaan daaroor dat jy nie genoeg blootstelling gekry het in die verskillende nuances in Engels nie. Dis hoekom jy nie nog Engels praat soos wat jy doen. So remember these things when you teach these children. I think you're in a privileged position in the sense that you are also an additional language speaker, or most of you, and that you can use this to your advantage because you basically understand the situation in which these children find themselves. I think this is the last slide. The last thing that I'd like to mention is contracted forms. In jou video's van verlede week, die vrou dit spesifiek genoem, wat sy gesê het, hoe ons praat en wat ons eintlik sê, klink baie keer nie dieselfde nie. Okay. And one of the things she highlighted was contracted forms. The fact that we say, what's the time, not what is the time. It's a good day, not it is a good day. Which can be very confusing to learners that do not necessarily have heard this before. Okay. So think about that as well. Encourage speaking to use non-contracted forms, but as the learners progress, let them switch over to contracted forms because they'll obviously have more exposure. The important thing is to give them exposure to these things. Jy kan wel net soveel doen in die klas, maar vra uit wat hulle lees. Gee hulle goeders om te lees wat op hulle vlak is en hulle belangstelling is, want dit gee hulle meer blootstelling. Okay. We then move to assessment for listening and speaking. I think this is the last event, that's what I gedink het. Specifically how you assess. Now I said at the beginning, I think it is important to move away from just a type of luisterbegrip scenario, but it is also important to go and have a look what CAP says. It says there that listening and speaking is of critical importance for all subjects. It's actually stating the obvious, but some people don't realize that. The fact that a lot of learners' spoken language need to be scaffolded. Ek dink as jy dit nou nog nie besef teen die einde van hierdie les nie, dan jy nie lekker gekonsentreer nie. And then learners should receive 2 hours of listening and speaking teaching in a 2-week cycle. Ja, cumulatief klink dit reg. Ek dink dit kan baie meer. Ek dink dat die belangrike ding is om nie wenig altyd daai 2 ure te probeer assesseer en te kyk hoe dit is nie, maar dit deurlopend te monitor. Toe ek het gesê, kry 'n klaslys en maak aantekening van hoe kinders praat, hoe hulle reageer, hoe hulle luister in die taal. Dit is waaroor dit gaan. Daar gaan formele assesseringsgeleenthede wees, waar luister en praat getoets sal word, maar dit moet eintlik die basis vorm van jou ander aktiwiteite. Ek dink dit is baie keer daar wat ons dit misverstaan oor hoe ons dit moet gebruik. Dit moet die vertrekpunt wees van jou lees en skryf, van jou taal, dat daar gepraat en geluister moet word en dit actief moet bevorder word, want dit gaan die ander vaardighede soveel meer vooruitbring. Assessment, I said specifically, well, there's essentially what I said just now, that it should be the basis of all your activities. The focus should not necessarily be on listening and speaking, but it should be geared toward listening and speaking to bring across the other activity. You must ask yourself specifically what you are trying to test. Okay, wil ek die vaardigheid van die kind assesseer, wil ek kyk op wat vlak hy is dit noodwendig iets waarmee die kind beter is op ander vaardighede of vice versa. Dit is baie belangrik. So in essence, planning is what I'm trying to say here. Make sure you get to know your class and then start deciding on how you're going to design your assessment. But your assessment should also be able to show the learner and yourself and the parent, is the child making maak die kind vordering. Okay. Is there progress? Ek dink die belangrike ding om dit dan ook te doen is om te sê, hoe presteer die kind in 'n informele manier? En dan daai lysie wat jy by en sê, goed, die kind het nou 7 uit 10 hier gelewer, of hy gaan dalk na 6 toe, of hy gaan na 8 toe uit 10, en hoe presteer hy in 'n formele manier? Is daar die rol van angs om geassesseer te word wat die kind se prestasie bietjie dalk mag afbring? Keep that in mind as well. And basically, that is what the fourth point there concludes as well, is it should be through observation. Observeer die hele tyd. Dit hoef nie formeel te wees nie. Maak dit, ekskuus, vir jou klein mentor op 'n klas uit 'n stukkie papier waar jy sê, goed, dit raak beter, dit was sleg, dit kort nog werk, ek moet hierop konsentreer, develop your own shorthand basically to do this. Your baseline, of course, with any assessment should be there. Wat probeer jy aan die begin van die jaar, wat moet die kinders kan behaal in terme van luister en praat, en teen die einde van die jaar, wat moet hulle kan doen, kan bemeester het. Ek sê daar, the most prominent of these examples are listening comprehension, maar dan moet ek ook vir jou sê, veral in 'n eerste nasionale taal klas, or a first additional language class, listening comprehensions can often be, I don't want to call them nightmares, but they often seem very loose from the rest. Try and do comprehension, test comprehension through listening and speaking, but do them in less formalized ways. It can still be assessed, don't misunderstand me. You should still assess them, but take them away, because I, for example, have used, in my class, I've used advertisements for the older children, where they have to listen to the advertisement and answer questions based on it. And then one child can't hear. And then there's a problem with the accent and all kinds of things like that. Rather, try and think about this differently and how you're going to assess. You can still use listening comprehensions, but there is a lot of loopholes and problems in listening comprehensions that I found. I'm not saying it's incorrect. Please do use it when it works for you, but try and think out of the box as well. Go back to your activities and decide what you want to use and what could work well as an assessment without perhaps even the child knowing that they are being assessed. So dit is 'n baie beplan gebaseerde aktiwiteit hierdie, of vaardigheid hierdie, soos met al die vaardighede, maar ek dink hier nog meer, dat jy aktief, dat die kinders kan luister, dat die kinders kan praat, en so dat jy ook hulle taalvaardigheid, praatvaardigheid uitbou. Lastly, I think this is the last group. They're giving you a couple of examples again. Note making and summaries from a reading text, written or oral retelling, jou begripstoets, jou luisterbegrip kan byvoorbeeld so gedoen word. The expressing of opinions, don't let it just be a yes and no Q&A. Let them elaborate on what they're saying. Reflection by learners, for example, on a book, on values, on stereotyping, discussion of characters, storylines, reenacting or taking a story in their own direction, in, for example, groups, drama that they can use. You can, as I said earlier, design your listening comprehension in this way as well. I've given you 2 steps now that you can start off by saying, by using these, initiating and sustaining conversation. So have a piece that they need to listen to, okay? But then assess them individually through asking questions. It might be 1 or 2 questions per learner, might not necessarily always work in a big group. Divide them into smaller groups, give them the average marks between the group members. So involve each of the members in a discussion, give each of them a mark, and then give the group the average behind that. Be prepared to initiate a conversation as well. Give turns where they need to learn how to operate in a group as well, where they need to listen to what other group members are saying, what they need to listen to what the bigger group is saying. Involve your teaching techniques as well. As jy terugdink aan jou tweede jaar, jou fisiese komponente, jou verbale, jou assosiasie komponente wat jy van geleer het in jou tweede jaar om onderrig te gee ook. Okay, I think my speaking is quite done here. I must say I'm quite exhausted after this lesson. I enjoyed teaching it to you as well. I hope you have a good week. Keep on working on those lesson plans for the first part of your semester assignment, the first week of your 2-week cycle that you need to plan extensively. Remember, detail is the key here. Go and watch that video now that is on your class for the specific activities, and all of the best for your weekend ahead. Bye-bye.